Lucas had always been different from the other students at the Academy of Arts. From a young age, he had a unique view of the world, a peculiar way of seeing beauty where others did not. His eyes captured details that went unnoticed by most, like the texture of rust on a piece of metal or the subtle dance of light through leaves on an autumn afternoon. To Lucas, these fleeting moments were the essence of art. However, this distinctive vision was not always understood or appreciated by his peers and teachers. At the academy, many students were drawn to the prestige and recognition that art could bring, following traditional methods and classic techniques. Lucas's approach, with its focus on unconventional materials and an abstract, organic aesthetic, was seen as strange and out of the norm. Lucas dressed in a unique way, wearing clothes he painted and customized himself. His accessories were equally eccentric, often made from recycled or found materials. This aesthetic choice was an extension of his art, a reflection of his belief that everything in the world had artistic potential, depending on how it was looked at. But this eccentricity made Lucas an easy target for jokes and criticism. Among his peers, Ricardo was the most vocal critic. Coming from a family of artists, he felt destined for success. Ricardo was talented and knew it, but his confidence often turned into arrogance. He saw Lucas as a dilettante, someone who did not take art seriously. To Ricardo, art was about technique and perfection. To Lucas, it was about expression and emotion. One morning, during a sculpture class, Professor Mr. Almeida announced a special project. Each student was to create a work exploring the theme identity and expression. This would be a golden opportunity for students to showcase their creativity and technical skill. Lucas saw the project as a chance to finally express his vision meaningfully, but he knew he would face resistance. During a group discussion, Lucas shared his idea for the sculpture. He wanted to use recyclable materials and natural elements, such as branches, stones, and broken glass, to create a piece that represented the complexity and multifaceted nature of human identity. The sculpture would be a three-dimensional collage of disparate elements, united to form a cohesive image, but open to multiple interpretations. Hearing Lucas's description, Ricardo did not miss the opportunity to mock him. "So, Lucas, are you going to impress us with a pile of trash and dry leaves?" Ricardo said with a sarcastic smile. "Maybe you should try something simpler, like a self-portrait. That way, we might understand what you're trying to do." The other students laughed, and Lucas felt his face flush. He had always felt uncomfortable in social situations, and Ricardo's comments struck a sensitive chord. Lucas knew his approach was different, but he firmly believed in his vision. He did not just want to create something beautiful. He wanted to provoke a reaction, to make people think and feel. Mr. Almeida, noticing Lucas's embarrassment, intervened. "Remember, art is a form of personal expression," he said, in a calm but authoritative voice. "We're not here to judge the value of an idea based on our own prejudices. Each of you has the opportunity to explore your vision of identity and expression. Let's wait and see what each of you creates before drawing conclusions." Despite the professor's words, Lucas knew that many of his peers had already judged him. He was the strange one, the eccentric, the one who did not follow the established norms. But this perception did not discourage him. On the contrary, it strengthened his determination. Lucas wanted to prove that his vision was valid, that art did not need to be traditional to be meaningful. In the days that followed, Lucas immersed himself in the work. He spent hours in parks and forests, collecting branches, leaves, and stones. He visited junkyards and flea markets, where he found pieces of glass, rusted metal, and other objects that many would consider trash, but which he saw as full of artistic potential. Each piece he chose had a meaning, a story he wanted to tell through his sculpture. Lucas began assembling his work in the studio, a small space but full of natural light. He experimented with various arrangements of the materials, seeking a balance that conveyed the idea that identity is a collage of experiences and influences, some harmonious, others in conflict. He wanted the sculpture to be interactive, for viewers to walk around and see how different perspectives change the perception of the piece. As he worked, Lucas reflected on his own identity and the experiences that shaped him. He thought about the times he felt out of place, misunderstood, and how those experiences influenced his worldview. He wanted his sculpture to reflect this complexity, the idea that identity is not fixed but ever-evolving. As the presentation date approached, Lucas knew there was still much work to be done, but he also felt a growing excitement. For the first time, he had the chance to show the world his vision without filters, to be truly himself. He was ready to face criticism and mockery because he believed in the importance of his art. And so, Lucas continued to work tirelessly, determined to create something that not only impressed but also touched people in a deep way. He knew he was taking a risk, but to Lucas, true art always involved risk. It was a leap of faith, an expression of courage and authenticity. With the concept of his sculpture Fragments of Identity beginning to take shape, Lucas dived headfirst into the creation process. He knew this was the perfect opportunity to show everyone that his artistic vision had value and depth. Lucas spent hours collecting materials, visiting parks, forests, and even junkyards. Each object he found seemed to have its own story, a previous life that could now be transformed into art. In the Academy studio, Lucas meticulously organized his workspace. He divided the materials into categories: branches, stones, pieces of glass, and metal, each carefully selected. To Lucas, these materials were more than just objects. They represented the different facets of human experience. The branches, with their sinuous shapes and unique textures, symbolized growth and adaptation. The stones, solid and immutable, represented the permanent aspects of identity. The broken glass, reflecting light in unexpected ways, symbolized the fragility and beauty in imperfections. As he worked, Lucas deeply reflected on the theme identity and expression. He thought about how identity is constructed, not as a static entity, but as something fluid and ever-changing. Each person, he believed, was a collage of experiences, cultural influences, and personal moments, all blending to create something unique and unrepeatable. Lucas wanted his sculpture to capture this complexity, inviting viewers to look beyond surface appearances. The days passed quickly, and Lucas found himself increasingly absorbed in his project. He worked through the nights, taking advantage of the silence to focus. The Academy was almost deserted, with only the distant sound of occasional footsteps echoing through the corridors. In these moments of quietude, Lucas felt a deep connection with his work, as if he was giving form to a part of himself that had never been expressed before. Despite his dedication, Lucas could not avoid the doubts that occasionally arose. He knew his approach was radically different from what his peers and teachers were used to seeing. The Academy valued technique and precision, and Lucas feared his work might be seen as a lack of skill or, worse, as an intentional provocation. However, he also knew that art, for him, was not about following rules or pleasing everyone. It was about authentic expression, about creating something that was truly his own. Meanwhile, his peers were also busy with their projects. Lucas observed from a distance, admiring the work of some and feeling indifferent to others. He noticed that many were taking safe paths, exploring classic themes and techniques. Ricardo, for example, was creating a marble sculpture that was an homage to the Renaissance masters. His work, a detailed self-portrait, was technically impeccable and certainly impressive. Lucas respected Ricardo's skill but felt something was missing. Perhaps it was the soul, the risk of exposing something truly personal. During breaks, Lucas occasionally found himself in the Academy's cafe, where students discussed their projects. The conversations varied from heated debates about art theories to gossip about teachers and peers. Lucas, being more introverted, rarely participated actively, but he listened attentively. He noticed that many still saw art as a means to achieve recognition or success, not as a form of personal and emotional exploration. In one of these breaks, Ricardo approached Lucas. With a confident smile, he asked how Lucas's project was going. Lucas, though wary of Ricardo's intentions, briefly explained his idea of using found and recycled materials to represent the multiplicity of identity. Ricardo, trying to maintain a friendly tone, commented, "It's interesting, Lucas. It really is. But don't you think people will see this as well as a mess? I mean, all these different materials together. It can be confusing." Lucas, though bothered, responded calmly, "Maybe, but life is confusing too, full of layers and contradictions. I don't want to simplify something as complex as identity. I want people to think, to reflect. If my work seems like a mess to some, maybe that says more about how they see life than about the work itself." Ricardo smiled but seemed a bit unsettled by the response. He bid Lucas farewell, wishing him luck, but Lucas knew there was underlying tension. He felt that Ricardo, and perhaps others, still did not take his work seriously. Even so, Lucas continued his work, motivated by the conviction that art was an expression of personal truth. He adjusted the elements of his sculpture, seeking a harmony that, although perhaps not obvious to everyone, had deep meaning for him. Lucas knew he was creating something unique, something that reflected not only his vision of the world, but also his own life experiences and growth. As the presentation date approached, Lucas felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. He was about to expose a part of himself in a very public and vulnerable way. But he also knew that this was the essence of art, the risk of being seen and, perhaps, not being understood. For Lucas, this was part of the challenge and beauty of being an artist. And so, with his project almost complete, Lucas prepared for the presentation day, determined to show the world that true art goes beyond appearances and techniques, reaching the core of what it means to be human. The day of the big presentation finally arrived, bringing with it a mix of nervousness and anticipation that hung in the air at the Academy of Arts. The hallways were busier than usual, with students and teachers preparing for the event that would showcase the most creative and innovative works of the semester. For many, it was an opportunity to impress and perhaps gain recognition in the local art community. Lucas arrived early at the Academy, carefully carrying the final elements of his sculpture fragments of identity. He felt a mix of anxiety and determination, knowing he was about to expose not just his art but a part of himself. He chose a strategic corner of the auditorium to set up his work, a space that allowed for a 360-degree view, essential for viewers to appreciate the piece from all angles. Lucas's sculpture, now complete, was a fascinating composition of various materials. Dry branches formed an organic, fluid structure, interspersed with stones that gave stability to the base. Pieces of broken glass, carefully positioned, reflected light in multiple directions, creating a play of colors and shadows. Elements of rusted metal and found objects added a complex and evocative texture, suggesting past and forgotten stories. For Lucas, each piece had a meaning, representing the layers and nuances that make up human identity. As the other students arrived and set up their own works, the auditorium began to transform into an impromptu art gallery. The walls were adorned with paintings, photographs, and installations, each telling a unique story. The atmosphere was filled with nervous conversations and laughter as students prepared to explain their creations to teachers and guests. Lucas watched everything in silence, adjusting the final details of his sculpture. He knew his work would stand out for its unconventional and possibly controversial approach. Most students had opted for more traditional themes and techniques, such as detailed landscapes and realistic portraits. Ricardo, as expected, had created an impressive marble sculpture, a self-portrait that highlighted his technical skill and precision. As spectators began to circulate through the auditorium, examining the works and talking to the artists, Lucas mentally prepared for his presentation. He had rehearsed what he would say, but knew it would be difficult to predict the audience's reaction. To him, the sculpture was not just a work of art. It was an expression of his own journey and reflections on life and identity. It was Lucas's turn to present his work. He stood next to fragments of identity and waited for the small crowd to gather around. Lucas noticed the curious and, in some cases, skeptical looks from his peers and teachers. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice a little shaky at first but gaining confidence as he explained the concept behind his sculpture. My work, Fragments of Identity, is an exploration of the complexity of human identity, Lucas began. I used recycled and found materials to symbolize the different parts that make up who we are. Each material has its own story, its own texture and form. Together, they create something new and unique, just as our experiences and influences shape our identity. Lucas explained that the branches represented growth and adaptation, while the stones symbolized the stable and permanent elements of our identity. He talked about how the broken glass reflected light in unpredictable ways, symbolizing the beauty and vulnerability in human imperfections. The rusted metal and found objects represented the marks of time and past experiences, leaving lasting impressions on who we are. As Lucas spoke, he noticed that some of the spectators began to see his work differently. Professor Mr. Almeida, in particular, was clearly intrigued. He approached to examine the details more closely, running his hand over the branches and observing the play of light on the glass. Ricardo, who was nearby, seemed to divide his attention between Lucas's work and the reactions of others. After Lucas's presentation, there was a brief silence, as if the spectators needed a moment to process what they had seen and heard. Then, Mr. Almeida broke the silence with a thoughtful comment. "Lucas, your work is a powerful and evocative representation of identity," said the professor. "You've managed to capture a complexity that is often difficult to express. The choice of materials and how you've integrated them is innovative. This is a clear example of how art can challenge our perceptions and make us think in new ways." Mr. Almeida's words were like a balm for Lucas. He felt a deep relief, a validation of his work and vision. The recognition from a respected professor meant a lot, especially at an academy where technique and tradition were often prioritized. Other students and teachers began to murmur among themselves, some expressing surprise, others admiring Lucas's courage to follow such a unique approach. Ricardo, who had maintained a posture of superiority, approached Lucas with a renewed expression of respect. "I admit I underestimated you, Lucas," Ricardo said in a sincere tone. "Your work is really impressive. You managed to do something different that has deep meaning. Congratulations." Lucas thanked him, feeling genuinely touched by Ricardo's change in attitude. He knew the path to that moment had not been easy, but the positive reaction from his peers and teachers made all the effort worthwhile. For the first time, Lucas felt that his artistic vision was being understood and valued. As the presentation continued and other students showcased their works, Lucas felt relieved and grateful for the support he received. He knew his work was not perfect and that he still had much to learn, but the fact that he had bravely stayed true to his vision was a victory in itself. After Lucas's presentation, the auditorium was left in contemplative silence. The moment was brief but full of meaning, as everyone seemed to absorb the impact of the work fragments of identity. Professor Mr. Almeida, still standing by the sculpture, looked at Lucas with a smile of approval. "Lucas, your sculpture is a provocative and deeply reflective work of art," Mr. Almeida declared, breaking the silence. "You have explored identity in a way that challenges conventions and invites introspection. The choice of materials and the way you integrated them show a mature understanding of human complexity." The professor's words echoed through the auditorium, and Lucas felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. He had faced numerous doubts and criticisms, but at that moment, he felt that his artistic vision had been understood and valued. Mr. Almeida's positive reaction was more than just praise. It was a validation of his work and unique approach. Lucas's peers, many of whom had initially mocked his idea, began murmuring among themselves. Some approached to take a closer look at the sculpture, examining the details and trying to understand what had previously seemed confusing to them. There was a mix of surprise and curiosity on the faces of the students. The sculpture, with its raw appearance and unusual materials, had challenged their expectations and prejudices about what could be considered art. Ricardo, who had been one of Lucas's harshest critics, approached with a renewed expression of respect. He had expected Lucas's work to be easily dismissed as a failed attempt at conceptual art. However, Mr. Almeida's reaction and the growing curiosity of the other students made him reconsider. "Lucas, I admit I was wrong about you and your work," Ricardo began, in a softer and more sincere voice than usual. "Your sculpture really surprised me. I think I underestimated the power of your vision. Congratulations." Lucas, still somewhat stunned by the change in attitude, smiled and thanked Ricardo. The recognition from his colleague was unexpected but welcome. It was a sign that, perhaps, he was starting to gain the respect of others, not just for his technical skill but for the originality and authenticity of his art. As students and teachers continued to explore the displayed works, Lucas observed in silence. He saw people discussing the sculpture, trying to interpret the elements and the meaning behind it. Some commented on the use of recycled materials and how it reflected a critique of consumer society, while others spoke about the idea of fragmentation and reconstruction of identity. One of the art theory teachers, Mrs. Beatriz, also approached Lucas. She was known for her critical and analytical approach, and Lucas was curious to hear her opinion. "Lucas, your work is fascinating," said Mrs. Beatriz in a thoughtful tone. "You've managed to capture a complexity that is often difficult to express. The way you use the materials to represent identity is innovative. It's a work that really makes people think." Lucas thanked her, feeling deeply satisfied with the feedback. He had spent so much time worrying if his work would be understood that now, with acceptance and recognition, he felt a mix of relief and joy. The sculpture not only provoked a reaction, but also started a dialogue about art and identity, something Lucas had always wanted to achieve. As the presentation continued and other students showed their works, Lucas allowed himself to relax a little. He felt fulfilled, not just because his work had been well received, but because he had been true to himself. Lucas knew there was still much to learn and explore as an artist, but that moment of acceptance and recognition was confirmation that he was on the right path. After the presentation, students and teachers gathered for a small cocktail party, discussing the works and sharing their impressions. Lucas was approached by several peers who wanted to know more about his inspiration and creative process. He talked about his vision of art as a form of personal expression and how he believed the materials he used were an extension of that expression. Ricardo, now less arrogant and more curious, joined the conversation. He was interested in understanding how Lucas had conceived the idea for Fragments of Identity and what he hoped to achieve with the work. "Lucas, you really managed to create something special here," Ricardo admitted. "I never would have thought of using these materials in this way. It's a very original approach. How did you come up with the idea?" Lucas explained that the idea came from his own life experiences and observations about how people build their identities from multiple influences. He spoke about how he always felt a bit out of place and how this led him to explore themes of identity and authenticity in his art. The conversation with Ricardo and other peers was a new experience for Lucas, who was used to being ignored or misunderstood. As the evening drew to a close, Lucas reflected on how much had changed since the beginning of the semester. He had faced challenges, both internal and external, but by staying true to his vision, he found new confidence in himself and his art. The recognition and respect from his peers and teachers were a bonus, but most importantly for Lucas was the sense of achievement and authenticity. Lucas knew that the journey as an artist was just beginning. He was excited to continue exploring new ideas and techniques, always challenging himself and the conventions. The experience of Fragments of Identity had shown him that art is a continuous exploration, an endless journey in search of meaning and expression. And so, with a new sense of purpose and a heart full of gratitude, Lucas left the auditorium that night, ready for the next chapter in his artistic life. In the days following the presentation, Fragments of Identity became one of the most talked about topics at the Academy of Arts. Lucas's sculpture had captured the attention of teachers, students, and even some external visitors who came to see the students' works. The piece stood out not only for its visually intriguing appearance, but also for the depth of concept and the story Lucas managed to convey through such unusual materials. Lucas, who once felt isolated and underestimated, now found himself at the center of attention. Teachers who had never interacted much with him began to take an interest in his work, wanting to know more about his inspirations and techniques. The sculpture had revealed a side of Lucas that few knew: his ability to combine a conceptual approach with skilled execution, creating something truly unique and meaningful. Professor Mr. Almeida, impressed with Lucas's work, decided to highlight Fragments of Identity in a lecture on contemporary art he was preparing. He believed that Lucas's piece was a perfect example of how emerging artists were challenging traditional norms and exploring new ways of expressing the complexity of human experience. Mr. Almeida also invited Lucas to speak about his work during the lecture, offering him a platform to share his vision with a wider audience. Lucas, though nervous about speaking in public, accepted the invitation. He knew this was a rare opportunity to share his perspective and perhaps inspire others to see art differently. As he prepared for the lecture, Lucas reflected on the impact his sculpture was having. He had always believed that art should provoke reflection and conversation, and seeing his work do just that was deeply gratifying. Ricardo, whose marble self-portrait had been praised for its impeccable technique, also approached Lucas. He admitted that he had initially underestimated the value of Lucas's work, judging it only by the choice of materials and the unconventional appearance. Ricardo now saw that there was more to art than just technical skill. There was a need to communicate something genuine and resonant. "Lucas, I really learned a lot by observing your work and hearing you talk about it," Ricardo said in a sincere conversation. "Sometimes I get so focused on technique that I forget what I really want to say with my art. Your piece made me think about what it really means to express something through art." Lucas thanked Ricardo, appreciating the honesty and recognition. For Lucas, art had always been about authentic expression and emotional connection, and knowing that his work had touched someone as focused on technique as Ricardo was a confirmation that he was on the right path. Lucas's sculpture also attracted the attention of local art critics who were visiting the Academy for a student exhibition. One of the critics, Donna Cecilia, wrote a glowing review of Fragments of Identity, highlighting Lucas's boldness in using recycled materials and the emotional depth the work evoked. She described the sculpture as a visceral exploration of human complexity, challenging viewers to reconsider their own perceptions of identity and value. Donna Cecilia's review was published in a local newspaper, bringing even more attention to Lucas's work. The positive critique not only increased Lucas's visibility at the Academy, but also began attracting interest from art galleries and collectors. For a student who, until recently, felt like an outsider, this wave of recognition was overwhelming. As the attention grew, Lucas remained humble and focused on his work. He knew that despite the initial success, there was much more to learn and explore as an artist. He continued experimenting with different materials and techniques, always looking for new ways to express his ideas and emotions. Lucas began thinking about new projects, including a series of sculptures that would explore other aspects of identity, such as memory and perception. However, Lucas also reflected on the responsibility that came with recognition. He wanted to ensure that even with success, he did not stray from his vision and artistic integrity. For Lucas, art was a means of exploring and understanding himself and the world around him. He did not want to be influenced solely by the opinions of others, but wanted to continue creating from a place of authenticity. Ricardo, who now saw Lucas as a colleague and not just a competitor, suggested that they collaborate on a project. He was interested in combining his technical skills with Lucas's conceptual approach, exploring themes they both found intriguing. The idea of a collaboration excited Lucas, who saw it as an opportunity to learn and grow even more as an artist. Together, Lucas and Ricardo began planning a public art installation that would explore the connection between nature and humanity. They wanted to create a piece that was not only visually impressive, but also meaningful and accessible to a wider audience. The project, which they titled Natural Connections, would be a combination of sculpture, landscaping, and interactive art, inviting viewers to reflect on their relationship with the environment and with each other. As work on the installation progressed, Lucas felt a deep satisfaction. He was creating art that had meaning, that touched people and made them think. More than that, he was growing as an artist and as a person, finding new forms of expression and new paths to explore. The impact of Fragments of Identity continued to resonate at the Academy and beyond. For Lucas, the success of the sculpture was a confirmation that by being true to himself and his vision, he could create something truly meaningful. He knew there were still many challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them with the same courage and authenticity that had brought him this far. And so, with a new project underway and a growing community of supporters, Lucas continued his artistic journey, always looking for new ways to explore and express the complexity of the human experience. With the success of Fragments of Identity, Lucas and Ricardo decided to join forces to create something that combined their distinct skills and visions. They saw the collaboration as an opportunity to learn from each other and explore new artistic territories. The project for the installation Natural Connections began to take shape, with both contributing their ideas and experiences. Lucas was excited about the prospect of working with Ricardo. Ricardo's experience with classical techniques and mastery of traditional materials like marble and bronze complemented Lucas's more experimental approach. On the other hand, Lucas brought a fresh and innovative perspective, with his ability to see artistic potential in unconventional materials and his inclination towards abstract concepts. This blend of styles promised to create something truly unique and meaningful. The concept of natural connections revolved around the interconnection between humans and nature. They wanted to create an installation that was both a work of art and an interactive experience, where viewers could explore and reflect on the relationship between humanity and the natural environment. The idea was for the installation to be not only contemplative but also participatory, inviting people to interact with the elements and reflect on their own impact on the world. The duo decided to use a public park as the location for the installation. The choice of location was not just for convenience but also for symbolism. They wanted the art to be accessible to everyone, outside the traditional confines of galleries and museums. They wanted anyone, regardless of age or background, to have access to the work and perhaps be inspired by it. The collaboration required both to step out of their comfort zones. Ricardo, used to the precision and predictability of traditional materials, had to learn to work with less conventional materials and accept a certain degree of unpredictability. He began to appreciate the challenge of working with natural elements like stones and wood, which, with their imperfections and variations, brought an organic and authentic quality to the work. Lucas, in turn, benefited from Ricardo's technical knowledge. He learned new sculpting and molding techniques, which expanded his skills and gave him new tools to express his ideas. Ricardo taught him about the structural balance needed in larger pieces, something that was crucial to ensure the installation was safe and durable. This exchange of knowledge and skills was enriching for both, leading to personal and artistic growth. Throughout the process, Lucas and Ricardo faced challenges that required patience and creativity. They had to find ways to integrate natural and artificial elements harmoniously, creating a visual narrative that was both cohesive and multifaceted. Working in an outdoor environment also brought its own difficulties, such as dealing with weather conditions and the need to ensure the material's durability. During the development of Natural Connections, the duo held regular meetings to discuss progress and adjust the plan as needed. These meetings became a space for exchanging ideas and constructive feedback, where both could express their opinions and concerns. Lucas appreciated Ricardo's honesty and clarity, while Ricardo admired Lucas's creativity and vision. They discovered that, despite their differences, they shared a mutual respect for art and a willingness to experiment and innovate. One of the most exciting parts of the project was creating interactive elements that allowed the public to participate actively in the installation. Lucas and Ricardo designed several stations within the park where visitors could touch, move, and rearrange parts of the work. These stations included kinetic sculptures that reacted to touch and soundtracks that changed with people's movements. The idea was that each interaction would leave a mark, symbolizing how human actions affect the environment. The installation also included areas for rest and reflection, where people could sit and appreciate the natural beauty of the park while reflecting on the work's message. Ricardo and Lucas wanted to create a space that was both aesthetic and meditative, a place where art and nature met in perfect harmony. As the project progressed, Lucas and Ricardo began attracting local media attention. Newspapers and art blogs started covering the installation, highlighting the innovative collaboration and creative use of materials. They were invited to speak at art events and participate in discussion panels about the future of public art. The duo saw this as an opportunity not only to promote their work, but also to spread the idea that art should be accessible and relevant to society. The Natural Connections installation was finally inaugurated at a public event that attracted a large crowd. There was an atmosphere of excitement and curiosity as people explored the work, interacting with the elements and discovering the different layers of meaning. The reactions were overwhelmingly positive, with many praising the depth of the message and the beauty of the execution. For Lucas, seeing people engage with the work was a profoundly gratifying experience. He saw children playing with the kinetic sculptures, adults taking photos, and couples sitting in the reflection areas, all while discussing the installation's message. The sight of his art touching people's lives in such a direct and meaningful way was a confirmation that he was on the right path. Ricardo, also emotional, reflected on how much he had learned and grown by working with Lucas. He realized that technique and precision, while important, were not everything. There was a beauty and authenticity in allowing nature and spontaneity to play a role in artistic creation. He was grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with someone who saw the world in such a different and inspiring way. At the end of the day, as the sun began to set, Lucas and Ricardo stood together, watching people interact with their work. They knew the project had been a success, not just because of the recognition they received, but because they had created something that resonated deeply with people. Natural Connections was not just an art installation. It was a shared experience, an open dialogue about humanity's place in nature. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and inspiration, Lucas and Ricardo bid farewell to the park, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new phase in their artistic careers. They were ready to face new challenges and continue exploring the limits of art and human expression, always open to new collaborations and new ways of seeing the world. With the continued success of Natural Connections, Lucas and Ricardo found themselves in a new phase of their artistic careers. The installation not only gained local and regional recognition, but also began attracting national attention. Art critics, curators, and art enthusiasts from across the country started visiting the park, eager to experience the work that defied conventions and inspired reflection on the relationship between humanity and nature. Lucas, who initially saw himself as an outsider at the Academy of Arts, was now being invited to give talks and workshops at various institutions. He was invited to speak at universities and art conferences, where he shared his journey from a misunderstood student to a respected artist. In these lectures, Lucas emphasized the importance of authenticity in art, encouraging young artists to explore their own voice and vision rather than conforming to market or critical expectations. Ricardo also found himself embracing new opportunities. He was invited to teach workshops on sculpture and mixed techniques, combining his technical expertise with the more experimental approaches he learned from Lucas. Together, they began developing a series of courses exploring the intersection of traditional and contemporary techniques, offering students a comprehensive view of artistic practice. In addition to educational opportunities, Lucas and Ricardo were also approached by several galleries and cultural institutions interested in showcasing their works in exhibitions. A major contemporary art gallery in São Paulo offered them a solo exhibition, an opportunity to showcase not only Natural Connections, but also new works reflecting their ongoing collaboration. The exhibition, titled Echoes and Connections, was planned to explore themes of interconnectedness, identity, and sustainability. As they planned the exhibition, Lucas and Ricardo reflected on what they wanted to communicate with their new works. They decided to create a series of pieces that would continue to explore the relationship between humans and the natural environment, but they also wanted to address broader social and cultural issues. They began working on a series of installations addressing themes such as collective memory, cultural identity, and the untold stories of marginalized communities. One of the most ambitious projects was an interactive installation called Invisible Roots. The piece explored the idea that everyone has roots and stories that shape who they are, often invisible to the outside world. The installation invited viewers to leave their own marks, writing stories or memories on sheets of paper that were then incorporated into the work. The piece became a space for reflection and sharing, where the voices of different people intertwined to create a tapestry of human experiences. Lucas and Ricardo also got involved in community projects, using their art as a tool for social engagement and education. They collaborated with local schools and nonprofit organizations to create art programs that addressed environmental and social issues. These programs not only promoted creativity but also encouraged participants to think critically about the world around them and their role in it. Meanwhile, media attention continued to grow. Newspapers and art magazines published articles and interviews, highlighting Lucas and Ricardo's journey and the impact of their works. The critic Dona Cecilia, who had supported Lucas from the beginning, wrote an extensive piece on the duo's evolution, describing them as innovative and indispensable voices in contemporary Brazilian art. She praised their ability to tackle complex themes in an accessible and engaging way, making art relevant to a broad audience. Over time, Lucas began receiving invitations to participate in international exhibitions. He and Ricardo were invited to a biennial art event in Venice, where they would showcase a new work exploring global interconnectedness and the impact of climate change. This international recognition was an important milestone for both, signaling that their art was resonating not only locally but also on a global scale. As Lucas and Ricardo prepared for these new opportunities, they also reflected on their personal growth. Lucas, in particular, felt more confident and secure in his identity as an artist. He had gone from an uncertain and underestimated young man to a respected figure in the art world. He knew that this transformation would not have been possible without the courage to follow his unique vision and the willingness to learn from others, including Ricardo. Ricardo, for his part, appreciated the journey he had shared with Lucas. He had started as a technical artist, focused on precision and form, but now saw art in a broader and more meaningful way. The collaboration with Lucas had helped him understand that art could be a powerful form of communication and social transformation. He was excited to continue exploring these themes in his future works. However, with all the success and recognition, Lucas and Ricardo knew they needed to keep their feet on the ground. They continued to challenge each other and seek new inspirations. They knew that art, like life, was a continuous process of learning and growth. Both were determined not to rest on their laurels, always seeking ways to expand their horizons and positively contribute to the world. As they watched the sunset together, Lucas and Ricardo reflected on the journey that had brought them there. They knew the artistic journey was far from over. There were still many stories to be told, many challenges to be faced, and many lives to be touched. With gratitude and determination, they committed to continuing to explore, create, and inspire. And so, with a clear vision of the future and a deep connection to their artistic roots, Lucas and Ricardo were ready to embark on the next phase of their journey. They knew that, regardless of the challenges ahead, they had each other and the certainty that they were doing what they loved. And that, for them, was the most important thing.